Thank you for joining us today in Jennifer Schaus and Associates complimentary webinar series. We are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. This year on Fridays, we are covering procurement playbooks. We will take a deep dive into doing business with the federal agencies and departments with our panelists. On Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern, we will cover the FAR supplement and procurement regulations for agencies and departments. Fridays, we will cover the business development and marketing aspects of the same agency and departments. The full schedule and the sign-up links and the recordings are on our website. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Virginia PTAC at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group training are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTACs can offer. And a special thanks to our sponsor, the Federal Business Council. The FBC creates and manages virtual and in-person meetings and events to connect appropriate industry and government thought leaders, product providers, and solutions with government programs that use them. The FBC works within mission-specific programs for a variety of agencies to connect government and industry in the form of in-person and virtual conferences, training events, policy dialogue, and outreach. Over the last 40 plus years, FBC has become a comprehensive resource for connecting industry and federal government. DASTN is an IT and cloud solutions provider working with corporations, the military, and government agencies to lower their costs, increase scalability, improve operational efficiency, and meet compliance regulations using targeted cloud-based solutions. DASTN is a certified partner of Oracle NetSuite, a premier tier Google Cloud partner, a certified partner of Cisco, Virtue, AO Docs, and Authenticate. For more information about DASTN services or to schedule a complimentary consultation, email joe.alston or visit the DASTN website. Today we are covering USAID. Our panelists for today are Archisha Meehan at GovSpend and Kevin Davis at USAID. We want to thank our friends from GovSpend, Miss Archisha Meehan. Great to have you. Thank you, Archisha. Okay, Archisha, I will mute myself now and just let me know when you're ready for the next slide. The floor is yours.
Perfect, thanks. Next slide. Good afternoon or morning, everyone. My name is Archisha Meehan, and I am the Senior Federal Product Manager at GovSpend, which actually is the parent company for FedMine. For those who don't know FedMine, we were founded way back in 2004, focused on the federal spending space. And what we really do is we integrate all the various 18 federal data sources and sets into one easy-to-use platform to provide unparalleled reporting and transparency into the world of federal contracting. We got acquired by GovSpend way back 9 months ago, and we now provide the best data on the federal and the state local education market side. So excited to be here and excited to be part of the Playbook series, which Jennifer has put together to help our small businesses. So next slide. So the USAID, it was really interesting to learn so much about the USAID, to be honest, as I was preparing for this presentation. And for those of you who've heard me before, I always find it's very important to understand the mission and the vision of an agency, as you will notice the spend ties in with what that agency is required or what that agency's mission is. So, you know, the mission of USAID is well put here, that, you know, they promote and demonstrate democratic values abroad and advance a free, peaceful, and prosperous world. You know, to be more focused. It is the world's premier international development agency that is truly focused on driving development results. Their work advances the US national security and economic prosperity. It does demonstrate American generosity and promotes a path to recipient self-reliance and resilience. And with the ultimate objective is to support the partners to become self-reliant and capable of leading their own development agency journey. Sorry, next slide. So what do they do? This sort of summarizes or tries to summarize some of the things that they do. We all know that they do help in providing the humanitarian assistance, but they also help in innovation and partnerships, and of course, empowering the women and girls, which is really so needed, especially when you think about the world, the developing countries that need this assistance, and then of course promoting global health. What I can tell you that I did not realize was that the USAID was actually created in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy to lead the US government's international development and humanitarian efforts. I found that interesting. So I thought I'll share that tidbit with you. Next slide. So let's understand what has been the spend history of the agency. I am focusing truly on the contracts that have been awarded and not necessarily the grants, which we know USAID does a large amount of. So in FY21, USAID awarded a little less than $6 billion to about a little more than 1,900 companies. As you can see, this is a little drop over FY20, but it's pretty much in line with FY19. And if I mistake not, the USAID budget for FY23 has seen an increase. So hopefully we will see that increase for FY22 and 23. So next slide. When we start looking at how has the agency awarded its contracts, who has it awarded to, we again are keeping in mind the mission and the vision of an agency, and in understanding that when we are looking at numbers, we also realize that the agency is focused outside of the continental US. So when you start looking at the prime contractors, you will see companies such as Chemonics, DAI Global, ABT, Research Triangle Institute, companies that we've seen doing a lot of work with USAID for quite a few years. So I do want to mention that, and that hence will also tie in with the type of set-asides that an agency might do. So next slide. Looking at your top NAICS codes, and again, I always want to put in the NAICS codes and sort of put a side-to-side comparison with the PSC codes. But when we start looking at the NAICS codes, you will see the NAICS for professional services, engineering services, computer-related services, including a little bit of deep sea freight transportation. And when you start looking at the PSC codes, it just sort of gives you a lot more detail than just looking at the NAICS codes. So I always encourage, my clients and my companies to not just be focused on the NAICS codes, but also look at the PSC codes, because many times they will be more in line with what an agency is procuring. So that's important to keep in mind. And then also keep in mind that as the federal government moves more with its category management and strategic sourcing initiatives, the categories for GSA's category management are really based on PSC codes. So again, getting deeper into the PSC codes is important, and I think is going to get to be more and more important. Next slide. So let's look at our small business spend. We have a little less than 800 million that was awarded to about 440 companies. Top companies include PM Consulting Group, Social Solutions International, Encompass, Jefferson Consulting, all companies that we've heard of and are familiar with. So next slide. Now again, we're going to start looking at the NAICS codes, and you will see similar NAICS codes such as engineering services, but here you could see some new ones such as your environmental consulting services, medical, dental, and hospital equipment, and of course, computer and professional services NAICS codes. In terms of set-asides, it's always nice to see, in addition to our 8A sole sources and 8A competed awards, a nice amount of women-owned small business contracts, as also women-owned small business sole sources. Sort of really goes in with what the mission of the agency is, but it's really good to see these contracts being set aside or awarded as sole source. As if I start going back maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was not that much. So next slide. Now, coming out of, with the pandemic, I'm always going to mention or talk a little bit about, how has an agency spent money under the National Interest Action Code for COVID? And you could see that the FY20, the agency spent almost $1 billion, gone down a little bit to, as have most agencies, a little bit in FY21. Again, contracts, you have hyperlinks to all the contracts, but we have about 58 companies that received these $805 million of contracts under the NIA Code of COVID, and 107 million of these were awarded as small business contracts. So, but again, as I talk about small business, keep in mind that, that the USAID does do a lot of work outside the continental US. So next slide. So let's look at they did award a small amount as SBIRs and STTR programs, a little less than 10 million. I've also put in a link for the contracts that were awarded as, not contracts, as an overall grants overview, just to give you a quick look and idea. But next slide. So I did talk about PSC codes, and now I wanted to talk a little about categories. I personally believe that it is important to look at category spend. I think it gives us a much clearer perspective of how an agency is spending its overall. So in this case, you could see professional services, IT, medical. All of these are your top spend for the agency. Further, you could always go in and, see the subcategories and get a better understanding of what are those professional services for, or what are the IT services for. But this chart is just there to give you a quick look at your top categories and how has the agency spent, or which are the categories in which the agency is able to award the maximum contracts to small business. So again, important to look at. Next slide. Part of category management takes us straight into how are the top various IDIQs and GVACs being spent. I'm going to recommend this is where you use things as your keywords, your set-asides, and see how an agency is procuring on any of these vehicles that you might be on, or that you might have a partner on, or that you might want to think about getting into the next iteration of that vehicle. So again, important to use, but again, we see things like OASIS, 8A stars, NASA SOUP 5, pretty much across a lot of agencies. So this gives you some idea of how an agency is procuring through all its various GVACs and IDIQs that are out there. Next slide. I thought for USAID, it would be really helpful to look at the subcontracts that are being awarded. Now, keep in mind, these subcontracts that are being awarded are really coming out of the data that is in USA spending, which I believe comes from FSRS. Last year we had 89 primes, and I would say Chemonics is the largest prime that has awarded the most in terms of subcontracts. But I have 89 primes that awarded more than $2 billion to a little less than 1,200 subawardees. And that tells you a lot about how you could strategize whether you want to enter the USAID or you want to deepen your relationships within USAID. So part of how clients will use this information is, of course, looking at the data, adding on keywords, and understanding how the subcontracts are being awarded, who's winning them, when do they expire, what price is it at, but also understanding how is it that the larger primes are awarding the various companies that they are working with, maybe currently, in the past. Sort of helps to give us the idea of how a company is doing, what it might be looking at, and gives you that transparency. So I would always advise clients to have a look at the subcontract data also. Next slide. Opportunities, right? So opportunities is always something that we have to spend a lot of time on. And new opportunities are really coming out of the new initiatives that an agency might have, which of course, depends on the agency's needs, changing needs, and the funding that is available and that gets allocated to them. The other thing that a lot of times we have clients, and I would say the most successful companies do, is understanding the possible recompetes that are going to come up. And again, that happens from looking at, creating expiring contract searches. If you're an 8A, let's look at creating expiring contracts based on the type of work you do. Be as specific as you can. Understand, how look ahead. You could be 12, 24 months ahead. If you are an 8A, look at, expiring 8As that you could possibly work with, team with, things like that. If you are on an 8A, if you're on OASIS, look at contracts that might be expiring on the OASIS or other contracts that could go on one of these vehicles. This is where we spend time and understand and see what's coming out. So where do you get that data? Well, of course, your budget and program information gets to be super helpful. Many agencies will look at pre-solicitations and source of sort notices and will release them as a way of doing their market research. And then, of course, creating those expiring contract searches based on what you do, based on whatever system that you might be using. I would highly encourage you to do these searches. Next slide. So, and then if you are in the IT arena, I'm going to advise you to have a look at, the Exhibit 53s and the 300s, where you have the major IT programs and initiatives. Have a look at that, because that does give you an idea of what the total IT spend budget is. So, just to show you a quick look at USAID's top Exhibit 53, so the top 10 programs. Next slide. Let's look at USAID's expiring contracts. I have more than a little less than $3.5 billion that were awarded as other than small business contracts that are expiring in the next 12 months. And keeping in line with the companies that are in the top 10 companies, we actually have the top expiring contracts with Chemonics, Research Triangle Institute, and DAI. And if you look at the NAICS codes, again, a lot of professional services, education support services, as also international affairs NAICS code, which I haven't seen in a really long time, but yeah. Next slide. And this gives you a quick look at the top 10 contracts that are expiring. So, you can obviously understand what these are and see and get into them and understand exactly when they're expiring, what task orders are under these, things of that nature. And if you are a small business, then I would say based on that, this is where you start reaching out to some of the larger companies and see if there's a way for you to partner or work with them. Next slide. So let's look at your small business contracts that are expiring in the next 12 months. A little more than $1.5 billion. Top companies, Remote Medicine, Social Solutions, DevTech, PM Consulting Group, Encompass, Highlight, companies that we see quite a bit of, in the federal spend data. So next slide. In terms of the NAICS codes, again, this is more in line with what we saw overall for the USAID in terms of the NAICS codes that are being procured. Have a look at also the set-asides that the contracts, if any, have been awarded under. And that, again, tells you a little bit more about, how you could possibly look at understanding more of contracts that are expiring under specific socioeconomic categories too, along with the type of work that you do. So next slide. And this is a listing of the top contracts that are expiring. Quite a few of them on GSA. I wouldn't be surprised if they are on the OASIS or the vehicles such as that. So always, again, just go in and understand what they are. Next slide. And this is a quick look at some of the opportunities that are open. Again, you could sort them by the office, the locations, be as focused as you can. And as always, if you see a source of sort and pre-solicitation that is of something that you do, make sure you do respond to them. So next slide. So the new FY23 budget request just came up, and I did find it very interesting. The budget, I believe, is for includes the Department of State too. And these are just some of the things that I personally found interesting, but I would always encourage clients and companies to read and understand these programs, see what the initiatives are, what are the new initiatives, what are the, maybe there are increases or cuts in specific programs. But I personally did find that, transforming and enhancing the pandemic preparedness, about $6.5 billion, and that is good to see that, as also to see the $2.6 billion for USAID and Department of State for Women's Empowerment, Equality and Equity, as also more than $10 billion to bolster humanitarian assistance. There's a lot more information when you go into the budget, and also, of course, the forecast. But this was really, really interesting and fascinating for me to get into this detail for USAID. And I'm sure you are, going to hear a lot more from our agency, Kevin, who's who's going to talk next. Again, if any of you have any questions, feel free to email me. And I guess, Krista, I'm going to give it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Archisha, for a great overview. Now let's move to our inside perspective from the government. We want to thank Kevin Davis from USAID for also joining us today. I'll mute myself now and just let me know when you're ready for the next slide, Kevin. It's great to have you. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. So everybody, again, my name is Kevin Davis. I am one of the small business specialists in USAID's Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. Before working in that particular office, I worked at the U.S. Housing and Urban Development and Contracts. And before that, I worked at the Small Business Administration in the 8A program. So I have some familiarity with contracts as well as with small business related issues before working in the Osterbu office. Also, some of the offices I support would be the Policy Planning and Learning Office, as well as the Management Bureau. Next slide. So here, of course, would be a link to our website, usaid.gov. Just like what was already mentioned prior, going to the website, getting to understand the agency, getting to understand the particular offices as well as the particular bureaus and what they're looking for, what they purchased in the past, what their mission is. And this would be a good place to start at usaid.gov. And the other link here is to the Small Business Office where I work, and it is the OSDBU office. Now, one of the important links within the Small Business Office link would be the contact sheet. So like I said, I am one of the specialists in the office, and I just mentioned the two bureaus that I support, and that's the Management Bureau, which the CIO office falls under, as well as the the Finance Office, as well as our PPL office, the Policy Planning and Learning Bureau. Now, my co-workers, we have missions all around the world, as well as we have multiple different offices. One of our largest buyers as well as bureaus would be the Global Health Bureau. And once you go to this link, and you'll see the contact sheet for all of the specialists, for all of the staff in the office, you'll be able to see exactly who supports which office or which bureau, and that would be your initial contact for anything. If you may see something on the forecast or have any further questions, that would be your initial starting point. Next slide. So with that starting point, you would get the information on who you would want to contact from our business forecast. So our Office of Acquisition and Assistance, like I mentioned, I worked at 3 other agencies, and I left out I worked at the district government as well. Our business forecast is absolutely one of the best business forecasts I have seen in the federal government, and that's because it's somewhat live. When you go on our forecast, anybody internally, if they're working on something right now and they put that requirement into the database, it automatically translate over to be in our forecast. Now, the other thing that's great about the forecast would be when the Chief of Procurement has a quarterly call. One of the other things, the link right here, is we have a workwithusaid.org, and that particular link right there, it not only has overviews, but it allows you to somewhat register with our agency to get familiar with what we're doing, and it allows you to put your information in. So when we're looking for vendors, or for you to for us to get familiar with you as well, outside of before we see the market research information, this is one thing we can double check on you. This is something that if you're looking at market research, if we're doing going strictly by the FAR, if we just go into our workwithusaid.org, this is something we can identify you at. Next slide. So here for the scorecard. So there are a couple of places to find the scorecard, as you know, would be at the U.S. Small Business Administration's website, SBA.gov. But on our website, it shows what our new goals are for the year, as well as some of our accomplishments. And I can say that internally, we have never met our hub zone goal, unfortunately. So if there are any HubZone firms that are listening, that are attending this session, or that you may know of, I would absolutely encourage you to definitely look at our business forecast, to come in contact with our agency, and not just HubZone firms. We have a need for all of the categories: service-disabled veterans, SDBs, as you are aware, hopefully. The president has increased all the agency's goals for SDB. So we're also looking to have more awards, more set-asides for SDB. And one way a lot of agencies accomplish that is through the 8A program. So be aware of that. Next slide. So here would be the link on OSDBU's internal website on USAID.gov. Now, we have a whole new person, Ms. Kimberly Mace, who is great, and she has a whole new outreach strategy. So when you go into this link, be prepared for it to be updated. She worked on a whole new outreach strategy, and she's going to post all of her outreach that she has planned for the year. It's my understanding, just to give you a bit of inside information, that she was nice enough to share with me that she's planning on doing at least quarterly outreach sessions. We have a annual conference this year. Our annual conference is tentatively scheduled for October, and all that information will be posted on this particular link. At the current moment, it's not, because Miss Mace is revamping everything, doing everything over, and she's doing a real great job at it. Next slide, please. So I got a little ahead of myself. So we're gonna talk about some of the best practices. And as I already mentioned for the forecast, that it is pretty much live. So if you go in there, you can also drill down. Let's say I support the Management Bureau. If you want to go to the Management Bureau, you can click on the full Management Bureau, or you can just go to, like a lot of people do, and I'm mentioning the CIO's office, the Chief Information Office, because I get a lot of IT contractors. You could just select to see what specifically that particular office has on the business forecast. One other thing, this is great, one of our best practices is our Office of Acquisition and Assistance offers quarterly calls. And here, if you see something on the forecast and you have a question about it, if you come to the OSTBU office as your first point of contact, sometimes a lot of the information that may be requested is not publicly available at the time. So what you would do is pose that question for the quarterly call, and the chief of procurement will direct people to answer the questions, and they actually have a list of all the questions and all of the answers for every procurement, whether it's in Washington or any of the missions. And I believe the last one just took place on the 22nd of last month. So it was just a couple of weeks ago. And there were about 400 questions that were answered. And when I say that the OSTBU can only give out publicly available information, although that is the case, and I suggest that we are your first point of contact, once we hear small business concerns, once we get an inquiry, what we do is inreach. So we will talk to our internal contact and say, I'm getting a lot of inquiries from the small business community that are interested in this particular requirement, or that, this particular requirement needs to be updated on the forecast. We have a lot of people who are aware that a particular contract is expiring, and they would like to know if there's going to be a follow-on. If there is, can you kindly update the information? And some internally, those are just some of the things that go on once you contact the small business office. Let's see here. So another best practice is we view our contractors as partners, and this is a best practice, and this is beneficial to everybody because it's a win-win situation. It's not, we don't take the adversary approach to contractors. We try to include you early on. That's why we have a couple of the other things that follow this. We just move into the market research, where we're looking for partners in advance. So when we're doing the market research, that goes back to the workwithusaid.org. We also have a database in the small business office called SBMart. We also use SAM, and we go also as well as to the Small Business Administration's Dynamic Small Business Search. Now, those are just some of the areas we can query for market research. If it's something that we're thinking about doing the schedule, we of course go to the e-library for schedules. We go into Oasis. We post sources sought as well as requests for information on all of these through all of these avenues, as well to do the market research. Another approach to market research, and I suggest firms do this regularly, is not only to update your page, update your web page, as well as update your information. So if you have information on one of the databases and there's a limited amount of characters that you can place in, I would suggest putting in a lot of the keywords rather than a lot of paragraphs and sentences. Lots of times technical people are looking for a keyword. If we're going just like engineering, we would like to know if you work OCONUS. We would like to know if you work with USAID. USAID can be one of the keywords that brings you to the top of the list. OCONUS can be one of the keywords that bring you to the top of the list. Whatever field, whatever services or products that you're providing within your field, whatever keywords that are there, it brings you to the top of the list when we're querying, when we're just looking at databases, before we even inquire any further, before we even ask for a possible capability statement to see if you're a good fit. A lot of times when we're doing market research, we just go to your website or we go to one of these databases and making sure that the keywords are there. It goes a long way, and it puts you sometimes on a short list. Another thing that's one of our best practice that it comes out because we view contractors as partners is the industry day and networking session. So when you're looking at some of our procurements on our forecast, or if it's something like has been mentioned before that you're aware that is expiring, or if you want to partner with a larger business, the industry day networking session is a great avenue. And as the federal government, that's one way we can facilitate any partnering or teaming, as well as for you to garner and meet the internal people. So we'll have an industry day, we'll have the program people there, as well as the contracts office, and you can ask questions. You can get a little more familiar with how they want to structure the requirement, as well as ask them questions about the incumbent or the past contracts, as well as meet other contractors that are interested in the requirement or who have already worked on the contract. Now, I know right now we're in a quasi virtual environment, but some of the sessions coming in the future will start to go back to being in-person sessions. And in the past, we've been quite instrumental with the networking sessions and the industry days with getting contractors together to meet one another to see who works in what area and what contracts they're interested in for partnering opportunities. And this goes a long way with the agency as well as you getting new contractors on board, facilitating new small business awards, which all agencies are required to do. And we're also looking to increase not only our small business goals, our goals for SDBs, our goals for hub zones, as well as service-able veterans, but we're also looking for new contractors. And this is actually a plea to any contractor interested, any contractor that's doing any federal government work. If you have federal government experience, and when I'm saying experience, because we're looking to get you on our contracts. So I would like for firms that have definitely have experience with bidding, with winning, with the federal procurement process, to engage our agency, to engage our office, and to be fully invested to see us as a partner to work with our agency. Other firms that may not have that full government experience of winning contracts, we would like to meet you too, but we also would like for you to possibly work with firms like Jennifer's firm, You have, again, it was mentioned, the Virginia PTAC, to get you ready to engage our agency or any agency with putting your proposals together. And so you can these go past the basic criteria to get to the next step, which is award, which is a win-win for us all. It's a win for the agency. It's a win for American small business. And of course, it's a win for the small business office as well as for your business. Next slide, please.
Thank you to our great speakers, our sponsors, and to everyone who attended the presentation today. The recording and slides will be available by close of business Monday. We look forward to seeing you next week as we dig into the Department of Commerce. The FAR supplement will be on Wednesday and the Playbook on Friday. Registration links are on our website. Thank you so much, everyone.